going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot of information to share with all of you today. Welcome to our February Lunch and Learn. I'm Amanda Lakin, the Director of Communications and Marketing for the Coalition, and I have just a couple of event announcements for you today. Tomorrow at 11:30, we have live from Carson City with Flynn Judici Government Affairs. Our Government Affairs team is going to be hosting a live meeting where they'll be sharing some updates on what they're seeing in the legislative session and answering questions. Next Tuesday at noon, we have a policy talk with our Executive Director, Maurice. This is a great chance for all of our members to hop on and call with Maurice. We'll be sharing some of the bills that we're following, some that we're supporting, and we really would love to have our members provide feedback to Maurice at this time. So if you have questions, if you have concerns, or if you want us to look at, further into any of the bills, please hop on this call to chat with him. March 26th is our March Lunch and Learn with the Nevada Clean Energy Fund. And lastly, Tuesday, April 22nd is going to be our Affordable Housing Day at the Legislature. We are inviting all of our coalition members to join us for a day of advocacy. We're going to have breakfast, lunch. We have some special guest speakers already confirmed, including the Treasurer and Lieutenant Governor. And we're also going to be scheduling meetings with the coalition members to meet with our elected officials. So a lot of these events are member exclusive. So if you're interested in policy or interested in any of these events, you're not already a member, you can scan the code in the top right corner or reach out to me directly. Now I'm just going to turn it over to Maurice, who is going to kick off the session today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amanda. I appreciate everyone being here and tuning in. We are in session mode, ladies and gentlemen, and how exciting it is, but also understanding that we are finding ourselves at a critical juncture for housing policy in Nevada. We currently are monitoring roughly close to about 40 different bills with more to come. And so as Amanda alluded to, we have our conversations with Flynn Judici next week. Or tomorrow, excuse me, you have your conversations with myself next week. And so if you are a member, I really do urge for you to log in, be a part of the conversations. We need to know how these policies are going to affect your communities, your jurisdictions, where you live at. And so again, the coalition was established to advocate for affordable housing, attainable housing here in the state of Nevada. And so, but we cannot do that without your voice. So again, just a quick, just wanted to put that out there and make sure we remind you to be engaged, be all in, and we want to be able to report back and talk to our assembly members and our state Senate leaders how these bills will affect them overall. So with that being said, and as we start to transition over, today is an exciting day. We have Shawn McCoy, who is the director and assistant professor for UNLV Lied Center for Real Estate, and Nick Irwin, who is the research director. And so they will be providing us data and research that has been provided to them, or that they have completed over the last few years about the Nevada market. And then we have Juawana Grant, who is the Deputy Administrator of Programs for the Nevada Housing Division, formerly Nevada Housing Coalition employee. And so we really miss her, but we are so happy to see her excelling in her new role. And so today's topic is diving into Nevada housing data, looking at trends, challenges, and solutions. Without further ado, I want to be able to just kick it right in because, again, we have a lot of information to go over. We're going to rearrange our schedule a little bit. We're going to have Juawana go first and kick off some information about Assembly Bill 310, the Nevada Supportive Housing Development Fund. Juawana, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. It's so great to be back here with all of you. I also miss my coalition team, but as I promised, when I transition from this position in October, you're still going to see me just as much, and I'll be around all the time. And I'm really excited to be here again today to kick off February's Lunch and Learn and give you an update on the same thing I always talked about when I was at the coalition. But now here from the division is AB 310, which we're now calling the Supportive Housing Development Fund. We've made a lot of progress, and I'm excited to share some of the updates with you today. Just have a quick presentation just to share with you where we are and in the implementation phase. Very exciting. As you all know, let me see here. You all know the Housing Division, we're the Housing Finance Agency for the state of Nevada. And in 2023, at the Housing Coalition, led a bill, AB 310, which created the Nevada Supportive Housing Development Fund in order to strengthen the tenancy support services and support increased operations for purpose-built quality supportive housing. So it was a one-time appropriation, just a reminder, approved for the fund, $2 million intended to support capacity building and training. We opened applications, the division opened applications for this fund in September of last year. We received 17 pre-applications, 13 were approved to move forward, and ultimately we received 12 applications for the first round of the Supportive Housing Development Fund. We also opened the request for proposals for technical assistance and consulting for two major pieces of AB 310, and that's the statewide capacity building piece and the program measurement and evaluation. So essentially creating infrastructure and capacity building for ongoing pipeline development of quality and purpose-built supportive housing, and also measuring and tracking outcomes for this pilot program so we can advocate for increased money into the fund in the future and really start growing our supportive housing inventory here in Nevada. So a little bit of application statistics put together by my amazing grants team. We had an average score of all applications of 80. We had a threshold of 85 points for awarded applications. We received 12 applications, 4 from Southern Nevada, 7 from Northern Nevada, and 1 from rural Nevada. Ultimately, we made 5 awards, 4 from Northern Nevada, 1 from Southern Nevada. And based on our application scoring, we're doing revisions to the application. We'll have our consultants online for the next round, but some key areas to provide technical and training assistance will be for program design and delivery and fiscal. And part of that will be improving our application process, providing templates and clearer instructions. And part of that will be some capacity building with our consultants. Our highest scoring applications, the 5 awards, we had representation from all eligible entities, so local government, nonprofits, and housing authorities were awarded, and will be supporting 182 units of new permanent supportive housing across the state with this first round. We're also anticipating a second round in the spring or summer, working on that right now, so stay tuned. The 5 projects were selected for this first round were Washoe County's CARES Campus, ASI's Line Drive Apartments, Reno Housing Authority's Carville Court, and Volunteers of America's Highway 40 project. And our Southern Nevada project is Coordinated Living of Southern Nevada's South Nellis PSH project. We had some great applications that didn't quite meet the threshold for this first round, so we're really looking forward to seeing applicants come back in the spring round. There. And we also made announcements, award letters for our technical assistance and program evaluation components. And it'll be a joint effort on both pieces from the Corporation for Supportive Housing and Urban Institute, both national organizations who've done similar work and done similar capacity building and program evaluation and measurement tracking in other states for pilot PSH programs. So we're really excited to bringing them online and having them join us and continue this work. Next steps, we're going to be contracting and sending out grant agreements, executing those. We're doing some in-house and external evaluation of our pilot application process and program guidelines. So we'll be revising those for the next round based on what we've learned this first time around. We'll be engaging more closely with the Interagency Council on Housing and Homelessness. If you remember, that was a key part of the legislation. We've presented to them last December on this award round, and we're going to be starting a subcommittee with the Interagency Council for this project overall and engaging cross-sector stakeholders on the future rounds and the capacity building and program evaluation. So look forward to some announcements from the division, the spring and summer funding round. And when we start launching technical assistance and training and capacity building, you'll see those come around as well. So that's it for me. A quick update for you. I'm available for questions. Here's my contact information. And then if you are a subgrantee or you're interested in applying, you can go ahead and send our grants team an email and make sure you're on the interested parties list in the listserv so they can get you on there for future announcements. But I'll stick around for questions at the end, but I'm really looking forward to Shawn and Nicholas's presentations as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Juawana. I appreciate the update. Let's now go ahead and kick it over to Nick.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Let me get this started here. Make sure we can see my screen here and get this started. So I'm going to talk sort of big picture about the state of the housing market in the state with a focus on what's going on a little bit more detailed at the county level. I'm going to kick it over to Shawn, who's going to talk about looking at things in a much more spatially explicit level. Just reminder at the top here, I am here as the research director at the Lead Center for Real Estate, but everything I say is not necessarily the views of NHC or UNLV. So everything is just a general disclaimer here. So let's look big picture. What's happened over time in Nevada? Well, there was a time not so long ago for a lot of folks in the state where housing was really affordable, especially relative to median household income. So this is an all transactions house price index. It closely mirrors pre-2000 to what median household income was. This means that housing was generally very affordable, 25 odd years ago. Of course, the run up to the housing crash and the Great Recession, house prices shot up, household incomes did not keep up, but then everything came back down. But then about 2014, things started to diverge and COVID turbocharged it, where housing has become even more unaffordable for a lot of folks. And this isn't something that's happening just state as a whole. If you look at what's happening here in the Las Vegas metro area, it's the same figure of looking at house price transaction index, which is proxying for how expensive are houses and median household income. I apologize for, I don't know why the data is truncated around the 90s. There's no data, but it's a similar story as what we saw on the state level. Housing was generally very affordable relative to median household income. And then as that the housing crisis, everything started to kick off around the early 2000s, houses became really unaffordable. The crash happened, things became affordable again. And then everything post-COVID really started to take off.
Excuse
Same
me, Nick.
story. Yeah.
Nick, if I could jump in, there was
Sure.
a comment in the chat. If you could make your slide larger, if it's possible. I know you have the controls on your end. If you can expand your slides, if that's possible.
Is it not full screen on your end?
Yes. We'll
Yes,
be
it
sharing the
is.
slides out. So if people are having a hard time seeing some of the smaller data, we'll be sharing one hopefully so you can have a better picture. But it's full screen on our.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize for that. Yeah, I think maybe the text at the test text at the top. I apologize for that. So let me go. So we have the same story here in Reno. Similar story. We have, again, housing was generally affordable in the 90s, less so in the 2000s, and became more affordable post-crash. And then post-COVID, everything really started to shoot off. So the big story to take away here is household income and housing prices have both increased over time, which is good. However, house prices have increased roughly 2 times more than income. That's going to lead to a lot of affordability issues. It's really pronounced in the urban areas. In the rural areas, we're hearing that things are similar, but there's not as much data. It's very tough to get good data, especially in some of our smaller rural areas. But we know they're suffering from affordability issues. One of the things that we want to do is at the Lead Center is we want to understand how bad is this affordability issue. And so what we have done is we published last year a ranking of all of the states and how cost burdened are we in terms of renters and owners. We are the 6th most, as of in 2022, we were the 6th most cost burdened state, excessively cost burdened state. This means people are spending more than 35% of their gross monthly income on housing expenses. Second in the West behind California. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people who are over that threshold that HUD describes as being potentially housing insecure, spending too much money on their household expenses, on their housing expenses. Now, this is for homeowners. The story for renters is even worse. In 2022, we were the 3rd most excessively cost burdened state for renters, ahead of California and behind only Florida. This means that if you see the number down there, 47.7% of renters in Nevada are spending more than 35% of their gross monthly income. That's, remember, gross monthly income is income before taxes, before retirement, before anything else, on housing. These are the folks that are particularly at risk, that a few days sick from work, they could potentially face an eviction. And this is because we're not building enough housing to meet what the demand is. We've since updated this, and let me tell you what, it's not any better using the most recent data. Now, I will say this data is lagged. This data is from the census, the American Community Survey. And one of the issues with that is it is a rolling survey, and the data does come out about a year and a half, maybe too late. That's sort of the issue with using census data. It gives us a good look back as to what happened. It's a little less clear about what we can expect in the future. But the interesting thing with renter cost burden, we've put distance between ourselves and Nevada and California in terms of renter unaffordability. California became slightly more affordable. We became less affordable. I don't think that's a boat we necessarily want to be in. State level data that I've just shown here, it's great for an overview, but as we all know, there are a lot of things that are happening across the state. Washoe County is very different than Clark County, which is very different than Nye County, which is different than maybe issues that they're facing up in Elko. So county level data can provide a much richer description of this, and we generally have this data available. But what we want to do at the Lead Center is take some of that county level data and interpolate it at a much more precise scale. We're talking about cities, we're talking about down to neighborhoods, and that can provide a much clearer idea of what's happening. Because there's one thing we know, that without having appropriate data, it's tough to make good policy. It's even tougher to make good decisions if you don't have good data. So that's been an effort that both myself and Shawn McCoy have undertaken in the past a couple years to make sure that we are delivering at the Lead Center high quality data that's impactful and can help inform policy. So what happens if we decide to look at what's happening at the county level? Here I have, this comes from a much larger table that I put together, but let's look at each county, and we're going to look at how much has household income changed from 2018 forward, for 2018 to 2023, relative to how much of house prices changed, and when available, how much have rents changed. Now, I will say the middle column here is from the Zillow House Value Index. That is an index that looks at the broad middle of housing, that 35 to 65% of houses that are affordable to people in those groups. So this isn't necessarily being skewed by a bunch of high income houses or by lower income houses. This is the broad middle. This is that missing middle, the houses that our teachers and our firefighters and our healthcare workers are looking to move into and increasingly find it tougher. If you go down the list here, a lot of counties here have had increases in income over time, but those house prices have increased twice, 3 times as high as some of them. You look at a county like Humboldt County, their income's actually decreased over time, but their house prices have increased 68% over that same time period. You move over to the rental index, and again, this is an index of that broad middle of the rental market. It's not high-end rentals. It's not necessarily Section 8 rentals. It's that broad middle, and we're seeing a similar story as well. Rents are increasing at a much higher rate than our incomes are. It's particularly pronounced in Clark and Washoe County, but also even some of our smaller counties that, and if they're underlined, the data is not there from 2020, it's first available. Even then, in Nye and Leon and Elko and Douglas and Carson, rents are going up much faster than incomes, and that means we have a growing affordability issue. None of these things happened overnight, though. Some of them are in our control, but we can broadly explain why we've had these issues with affordability into 2 categories. There's a demand side story and there's a supply side story. On the demand side story, well, our population's grown. That explains a lot. That's increasing our housing demand, and since you can't build new housing overnight, that's put pressure on house prices, because if supply is fixed in the short term, the only thing that can happen is house prices are going to go up. And more people moving into Nevada, which is great because it creates more people and it helps us diversify our economy across the state. They're the people that educate our children, that are our first responders. That's all great, but that just puts upward pressure on housing prices. The response to that should be, let's build more housing, but that's a little bit tougher, easier said than done. We also have a secondary issue that was the focus of a recent research report that Shawn McCoy and I put together at the Lead Center, where we're looking at new migrants into Nevada and how wealthy they are compared to our current residents. And what we found is that new migrants coming in, people coming from other states and moving into Nevada, tend to be wealthier. They tend to be a lot wealthier than current Nevada residents. This means that they're in a much better position to compete in the housing market. This means they have more money. This means they can, they can put an extra $10,000 down on an offer sheet for a house. They're willing to go the extra mile to get that rental unit. This is particularly problematic if you look at that second line here. The first line is Nevada residents who didn't move within the previous year. The second line is Nevada residents who moved within the year. So this is people that either moved for a job or just had to move for some other reason. Those folks are the ones that, are the ones that are particularly at risk here, because they are definitely going to be outcompeted. And this data, I will say, this data is from a couple of years ago because it's from the IRS statement of income data. And the issue with this is that the data has a deep time lag. We probably don't have the true effects of that big population boom we saw post-COVID and its actual impact until a few years out. Again, one of the problems with this backward-looking data, it makes it more difficult to inform good policy. Now, on the supply side, there are a lot of barriers. We're all familiar with it. I know Maurice said that recently you guys had a lunch and learn about the topic of the federal government and federal land ownership. Outside of mortgage rates, the federal government does play a big role in what happens across the state. It's our largest landowner. And we are one of the biggest states. About 84.4% of all of our land is owned by the federal government, which is absolutely blows out of the water our next closest state, which is Utah. And I want to give credit to the folks from the Lindsay Institute and Brookings Mountain West who put some of this data together, who really did the hard work and looked at all the federal land ownership statistics to put this together. To give you an idea of how big this is, if you split the state in two, one is federally owned, the other is everything else, you're going to get two states where that federally owned Nevada is still going to be one of the 15 largest states in the US. But that remainder, that state government, local government, tribal governments, that's the land that we own, we would just be the 41st largest state. And if you guys don't know the relative state rankings, I don't blame you, but that puts us a little bit smaller than Maryland, a little bit bigger than West Virginia. Here's another thing for local people. I shared this with my class. I did the calculation. If we think of the Strip as all the land in the state of Nevada, going from the Mandalay all the way up to the Strat, we'll define that as a Strip. The amount of land that we have to build that is not owned by the government would be from Mandalay to just about the Bellagio. Everything else is land that we cannot build on because the federal government owns it. It sort of puts in perspective how big of an issue federal land ownership is here. Now, of course, not all land, that federal land ownership isn't equally spread across space. And I think it's important to mention too that not all that land is equally buildable. That we have some issues with if the slope of the land is above 7 to 10%, it becomes difficult to pencil in projects. So a lot of this land that is steeply sloped, but some of it's not. And it's disproportionately spread across the state. Our urban areas, Clark County particularly, has a large amount of federal land ownership, but Washoe has less, Carson City even less. But some of our rural counties, they have, look at Lincoln County, 97.8% of that entire county is owned by the federal government. Nye County, 97.2%. That's an amazingly tremendous amount of land that just restricts how these counties can build and respond to the needs of their residents to build more housing to allow their economies to diversify. One of the other things that we can control, though, is zoning. Here's a map from the zoning atlas that this is on the left-hand side. This is for Las Vegas. The left-hand side is where single-family residential land is permitted to be built throughout the entire valley. And on the right side is where anything but single-family residential can be built. So this is 2 units, 3 units, all the way up to 4+ for multifamily. There's a lot of purple on the left, not as much on the right. If we were thinking about how to build more housing to address our housing needs, single-family residential is obviously going to be part of the story, but it's tough we need a lot more units to put on, and we can't just build them all. We can't build single-family residential to save ourselves from our current housing affordability issues. Reno, I'll give my hat tip to Reno and Washoe County. They are much more permissive and have more of their land zoned for multifamily, for building at least 2+ units on land. That's great. That's really, really helpful. potentially this is one way to think about allowing people to build denser on given land, can help put more units online, which will help put downward pressure on house prices. But one of the big issues we've seen, if we're looking at the data of how many houses are we building, how many permits are we pulling to build housing, we are not building. We started to ramp up during COVID, had a little burst past 2021, and things have started to come back down. We're not building as quickly as we have in the past. Now that can be explained by things like the current high interest rate environment. It's really tough for a lot of these projects to pencil in with, you know, a 7.5% interest. It's very difficult for these projects, and without state support or support from other actors, it's going to be difficult to build the number of units we need. But this is sort of the issue that we're facing. This is still aggregated data, though. And I think what's more interesting is if you can look even smaller at what's happening within cities, if what's happening within neighborhoods, it gives you an even clearer picture of the different issues we face. And the last thing I'll say before I pass it over to Maurice and to Shawn, I'm a big believer in data and data being publicly available. I don't think data should be gate kept in any way. Everyone should have access to this data and be able to interpret it, because it helps policymakers inform policy. It helps our stakeholders actually enact everything. It helps everyone else just be better informed, and better information allows us to make better decisions. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nick. I know you have to step away for a quick minute, but we just had 2 quick questions that
Sure.
you could address those. So the first one being, can you clarify what broad middle means for the Zillow index? And is it a
Sure.
certain range of percentiles?
Yeah, it's 35 to 65%. So it's housing. It's the 30. If you would divide your house in your housing price distribution, it's that big middle from 35% of the low end to 65% on the high end. So it's what we would say, it's that the housing that's affordable to your middle income folks.
Excellent. And then just SFR, does that mean 1 to 4 units or just the 1 unit?
That's just one single unit. Just for 1 unit, you can build one unit. Everything's zoned for single family residential. Everything else that's everything but SFR. Everything. So it's 2 units per everything and on up.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you for your time. And you'll be coming back on towards the end for more Q&A.
Yes, sir.
All right. So at this point, let's now switch it over to Shawn, and I'll let you go ahead and rock.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. And just want to do a quick audio check, which sounds good, and slide check. Can everyone see my slides? Fantastic. Gonna dive in and pick up a bit where Dr. Irwin left off and start thinking a bit more deeply about the limitations of some of this data, which is an important part of this dialogue, right? We want to look at the data, think about what we might may or may not be able to take away from it to spur some new questions, including our particular questions on workforce housing. So again, standard disclaimer, it's on the screen. I'm just going to move on. So going back to start this talk, I'm going to recirculate the slide on renter cost burden that Nick shared in his particular talk, and begin by talking about some data limitations, some concerns, some conundrums, and what this might mean for how we think about housing policy. So this was the map that Nick showed, and this is based on the American Community Survey. And the finding here was that in 2022, based on an analysis of renter cost burden, Nevada became the 2nd most cost burden state for renters in the US. Consider the following though. What if we go and look at multifamily rent? So instead of going to the census, we went to a data provider called CoStar, who provides data at the building level for multifamily or apartment market rate multifamily units. And I'll talk about later the coverage ratio. This data covers well over 93% of all market rate multifamily units in Southern Nevada. And what you're seeing out on the screen is a trend in average asking rent per unit from 2015 to 2024. And this particular line that you're looking at, the dashed line, is a trend based on how the market was trending leading up to COVID. And then we just extrapolate it out. And two things pop out. In 2022, the year that Nevada became the second most cost burden state for renters, it also was the largest decrease in multifamily rents in this data set. And that happens right here at the dip where you see 2022 Q4. The change in rent in the same period, the decrease in rent, was bigger than it ever was, but we also became renter cost burden. In fact, the editorial in the top right was a headline taken from this particular time period, Why Las Vegas Rents Are Plummeting. And again, it just starts asking us what's going on with multifamily and why may there be some disconnect between what the census has to say and what building level data on apartments has to say. And here's the thing. What we now know is the American Community Survey isn't multifamily data. The American Community Survey is all renter occupied households. It's a sample or a survey that tracks renter households versus owner occupied households, which means that when we're looking at these estimates of renter cost burden as reported by the census, it's a phenomenal measure to ask one question, namely, for the average renter across Clark County, how much are they paying of their income towards rent? Good data, but it covers single family rentals, market rate multifamily rentals, and a lot of people, even us at first didn't know this. The survey will also include subsidized affordable housing units. So this is something to take stock of, is the American Community Survey doesn't necessarily tell us what's going on in the multifamily market. And this led us to ask, well, what else happened in 2022? And it turns out that 2022 was the highest rate of investors' market share for single-family units. Investor purchasing of single-family units maxed out and peaked in 2022. And what we know from the data is that the data seems to suggest that certain areas within cities were affected by single-family investment purchases more than others. And so to give you a sort of sneak peek as to what this might look at, we pulled data from the Clark County Assessor's Office and provided an estimate of which homes were purchased and owned by single-family investors. And here's a sample neighborhood. Some neighborhoods will look like this. The red dots represent investor-owned property. Some neighborhoods will indeed look like this, and others will look like that. And as we span through the city, you start realizing the importance of getting away from the broad market trend and understanding that market trends tell the story of a housing market or a region, but market trends do not tell the story of a homeowner. A homeowner is living in a particular property. They care about what's happening in their particular building. So what might this mean then for how we think about what we can and cannot learn from the American Community Survey? One thing it might mean is that more renters are perhaps living in single-family rentals than perhaps ever before in 2022. And generally, but not always, these units are typically higher cost rentals, which means when the census goes out and surveys renter households, if we have more single-family rentals in the market, an increasingly larger share of renter households will disproportionately represent renters living in single-family units, which could directly increase the overall share of cost burden renters. Technically, even if income and rents weren't changed, it could happen purely by a compositional effect. And I think one of the policy implications is when we start talking about data, we really need to think very deeply about how the data was constructed, how it was sampled, and we certainly want to exercise caution using the census products to draw inferences on, for example, multifamily. The ACS is a phenomenal measure to measure the overall renter pool, but it may not be a perfect measure or a good measure to talk about market rate multifamily. All that to say is this led us to think very deeply about several new areas of research. And the area that we tackled recently is asking a fairly focused question. What proportion of market rate apartments are affordable to middle income households, which we define as households that have an income level between 60% and 120% of AMI, or area median income. So think about those that are slightly above and a little bit below what that area median income level is in a jurisdiction or a county or municipality. And the data we once again turn to is building level as opposed to county or market level. We're talking about building level data on market rate multifamily units that we access from the CoStar Group. And the data that we use to assess this covers 183,000 units of apartments in Clark County. And to give the audience a bit of a reference point, according to the Clark County Department of Comprehensive Planning, they estimate in their last report about 196,000 apartment units in Clark County, meaning this particular data has data at the building level that covers almost 93% of every market rate of every apartment unit in our county. So here's this a fairly straightforward methodology, very transparent methodology to think about affordability. And I'm going to kind of broad strokes outline how this works. We're going to start by just picking an income level. And suppose we start at, for example, 60% AMI, which in Clark County is $52,680. Given this income level, we're going to compute an affordable rent level by taking that annual gross income, 52680, converting it to monthly income, dividing by 12, and multiplying by 30% to stay under that affordability threshold. So in this case, for someone earning 52,680, that maximum level of affordable rent should be $1,317. Now, given that, we can then look, since we have building level data, I can go into the data and look at every single apartment building in Clark County and simply tally up how many of those buildings have asking rents or effective rents that are at or below that affordable level for these income groups, accounting for an assumption on monthly utility expenses. So I'm going to show you a few tables that give you these breakdowns and tallies. Before I do that, I'm going to give you a little diagram to help the audience understand and interpret these tables. So there's really sort of 4 components of the tables that are really relevant here. The column you're looking at here, this just tracks what income group we're looking at. So for right now, we're looking at 60 to 70% AMI households with annual income 52680 and monthly income 43980. And there's 3 circled numbers. The first number represents the affordable rent level for households in that income group. The second number, in this case 443, that represents the number of buildings. And keep in mind that in Clark County, those 183,000 units are composed of 959 distinct buildings. So in this case, of all those 959 apartment buildings, 443 of them are affordable to households in this range, meaning 46.2% of market rate multifamily units are affordable to households at 60 to 70% AMI. But here's the catch. This is assuming $0 utility. And we don't know exactly what the utilities are for each homeowner. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a worst case scenario and a best case scenario. Best case scenario, $0 utilities. Worst case scenario, we're going to push monthly utility expenses in excess of $300 a month and just let the data tell us what might be going on in this market. So I'm now going to replicate this slide, but I'm going to expand this for all other income groups. And that's the slide you're looking at now. So under the assumption of $0 in monthly utilities, for households, say, in the 80 to 90% of area median income, if you look at every market rate apartment building in Clark County, 84.5% of them will be affordable based on our affordability metric. If you look at households that are at the median, 96.9% will fall within that threshold. Now, keep in mind, this is an unrealistic upper bound estimate, if we wish, because it assumes nothing in utilities. We can then migrate into our lower bound estimate by making an assumption that renters pay $304 every single month in utilities. And we get to see how the data changes. And notice that it does change. For households in the 60 to 70% AMI range, instead of 46% of market rate units being affordable, a little over 25% are affordable. When we go to 70 to 80% AMI, almost half of all market rate multifamily units pencil out to be affordable under the assumption of $304 in monthly utility expenses. And as we get to that true median, 100% AMI, accounting for $304 in monthly utilities, 91.3% of market rate units are affordable. Now, keep in mind that this does not, this particular table, the research question here is all about middle income households. So we're not looking at households at 30% AMI, 20% AMI. We're also not looking at households at 200% AMI and so on and so on. It's about middle income populations. So kind of some broad takeaways is for households that are at the bottom end of the distribution in terms of the middle income group, 60 to 80% AMI, we're talking anywhere from about 1/4 upwards of 40% of market rate multifamily units that are affordable to groups in that particular area. And once we get up to 100% AMI, those proportions change very, very, very quickly. For those that work in multifamily, so speak to that audience, keeping in mind that asking rents are different than effective rents that account for concessions. If you read the full study, we replicate all these findings for a complete range of concession rate assumptions in the data, which are only going to further increase the share of affordability because concessions actually bring down the effective level of rent a tenant is paying. One thing I want to also remind the audience of is that affordability does not equate to availability. So the limitation of this study is that it ultimately isn't what we call a housing gap analysis. We're not looking at how many affordable units there are market rate versus how many renters we need to fill them. That's a whole second layer of research. And we suspect that there's going to be shortages and perhaps significant shortages at certain parts of the apartment market. With that said, even though these multifamily market rate units are largely affordable to households in this middle income range, if we have a supply issue, renters might have no choice but to move up that rental ladder and rent more expensive units and become cost burden just because of a glut on the supply side. And so to take a quote from our paper, at the time of this writing, CoStar shows that the number of market rate units under construction right now is down 37% relative to how many were under construction this time 1 year ago. So to close this part of the talk over, I'm just going to sort of pose the question, where is the multifamily market potentially heading? And I thought this was timely, and I'm citing here a periodical by the Las Vegas Review-Journal, Rent Roller Coaster, apartment prices in Las Vegas are dropping. And this is based on the exact same data that we have, that we're using. We're using CoStar data. And this is true. We actually replicate this finding and show that rents are down. But what happens, as Nick was saying, what happens if instead of looking at the market, what if we instead go look at the neighborhoods? And I'm going to show you that. So let's start by looking at Clark County. And what I'm going to do in the next slide is I'm going to map every zip code. And using the exact same data that CoStar provides for the market, CoStar also provides that data down to the zip code level. It's just the subcomponent properties that broad market share. The very next slide is going to show you how multifamily effective rents look by zip code currently in Clark County, Nevada. And here is that picture. And what I did is I extruded the zip codes elevation so that the higher the zip code is from the ground surface, the higher the rent. And this gives the audience an idea of how rents currently look for the market rate segment across Southern Nevada's neighborhoods. And this is generally the story that's been happening for quite a while. We see, by and large, high-priced rental neighborhoods on the periphery and lower-priced rental communities closer to the central part of the valley. So this gives you a look at how market rate rents look around the valley. The next slide is going to replicate this picture, but instead of looking at current rent levels, I'm going to show the audience how rents are changing right now as we speak, using, again, the exact same data. And here it is. Everything in red are neighborhoods where rents are going up, and everything in green are neighborhoods where rents are going down. And when we made the map, Nick and I looked at this and we're like, huh, there looks to be a fairly equal balance of areas where rents are rising and areas where rents are falling. And in fact, I can show you a zip code by zip code breakdown. On the left, we take the data into tabular format and give you a list of every zip code for which rents are going down. And on the right, in tabular format, we give you a list of every zip code for which rents are going up. And for the 15 years I've been studying housing economics and real estate, I have actually never seen this. Given the odd number of zip codes, this is a perfect split. Is 50-50 as the data would permit of neighborhoods by which rents are going down and neighborhoods by which rents are going up. So much so that on average, rents could average out to be slightly positive or slightly negative. But going back to that line I gave the audience a bit earlier, market trends tell the story of the market, but not of an individual homeowner or renter. So is the case here. People who are renting housing units or buying houses care very much more about what's happening on their particular street as opposed to what's happening on the market. And when markets are turbulent and housing costs are high and inflation is high and supply is limited, this is the time when markets can what we call bifurcate, see segments of the market where rents go up, segments of the market where rents go down. And the whole point of this is the overall market trend may or perhaps may not be consistent with what's happening in neighborhoods. We did a recent piece with the Review Journal talking about owner-occupied housing, and we found a different story. Out of all zip codes in Clark County, single-family home prices went up in every single one year over year, with the exception of only 6 neighborhoods. And of those 6 that whereby home prices went down, home prices fell by at least minus 1% in only 3. So the owner-occupied single-family market, for a whole basket of reasons, has had very resilient price growth. And to give everyone a statistic of how much purchasing power home buyers have lost in Clark County, what Nick and I did is said, look, let's go back to 2016. And given the median income of someone in Clark County, given the current interest rates on a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, and given the price per square foot of single family housing, we did a simple financial exercise that asks, how much house could the median home buyer qualify for to buy based on what's available? And we found that it's well over 2,000. It was at well over 2,000 square feet. It was actually about 2,900 square feet of house the median home buyer could qualify for in 2016. If we replicate that in 2024, the purchasing power of the median homeowner in terms of how much square feet of house they could qualify to buy given current market conditions has now fallen by 2,144 square feet, and it's decreasing at a pace of 240 square feet per year. What that means is if I could just marginally afford a home right now, and it was 2,000 square feet, my purchasing power would fall by 1,000 square feet of house in just 4 years. I'm going to stop there and wish to thank the audience as well as the Nevada Housing Coalition for having us on this wonderful panel. Thank you all.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Shawn, for all the information. You have definitely sparked curiosity within our crowd that is attending today. We have roughly about 7-8 questions that hopefully we can get through. If not, because we do have about roughly 5 more minutes before we have to wrap up. But if not, I will send out the questions and get your response and get it out to our audience so that this way we make sure that we are addressing everything. So I've been taking account as to what questions. And so the first one was, do you have estimates on how many units per county would need to be built to balance supply and demand?
Nick, you want to take it away or do you want me to jump in?
I mean, I think, well, the National Low Income Housing Coalition estimates that we're 70, 80,000 units short, and that's just for a lower income.
Correct.
And so, I mean, you probably have to, at least increase that by 50% to account for that, the people who are need homes, but otherwise couldn't afford them because they're otherwise eligible for anything else. So 100,000 plus. About the distribution across the county, I don't quite know, but we need to build a lot more.
Yeah. And just to add a bit onto Nick's comment is the challenge with housing is the housing shortage estimates are based on a snapshot in time, based on how many units we got and the income levels of people. In reality, it's a dynamic exercise. Once you build those 80,000 units and rent levels fall, you'll have inward migration that'll push rents up. And this is sort of at the heart of thinking about dynamic housing supply is if we need 80,000 units now, once we build them, we're going to need more. And so we got to think very cautiously about the migration analysis that Nick did in his study earlier.
Yeah, I mean, because we're always going to be an attractive place for people to move, and that's just going to keep putting upward pressure. So this means to build a lot more. And the thing about building more units is we may never actually realize that falling rents, but what we may see is like smaller year-to-year appreciation, which would be evidence that supply is helping.
And Nick, one thing I want to jump on and just put on for the audience to think about is land. Is when land prices are high, that distorts where we can pencil out multifamily development. And so if we're thinking about creating an equitable environment for homeowners to rent housing, one of the challenges of creating that environment that can create and alleviate socioeconomic disparities in renter households experience is we need to be able to deliver multifamily property as well as many other property types to neighborhoods across the entire valley, across the entire state.
Mm-hmm.
When you have scarcity of land, it drives land prices up across the entire community. And it makes it the first neighborhoods where you're going to see development fall apart, neighborhoods, right, that can't command high rents. So land prices are an important part of the development story because we want to be able to deliver housing units across that full spectrum of neighborhoods across the valley.
Excellent. I'm going to try to grab two more questions. The next question was, how might we take seasonal variation of monthly utilities into consideration when examining the number of affordable apartments? And then I'll tack on another question. What data set identifies non-owner occupied single family homes?
Well, I'll take that second one first. I was actually poking around at the census data viewer, which is a great tool. You can back it out from census data about what's happening. I think the American Housing Survey, AHS, which happens every 2 years, has a little bit more detail on that. But even then, we're not getting a good measure of that. And that's fundamentally the issue. As someone who I'm really interested in rental markets, that's fundamentally the issue when it comes to understanding rental markets. Is not every house is available for rent, and if people are just renting sort of offline or not through traditional means, if they're not listing on the MLS or equivalent, or somewhere like Rental Beast, which is sort of trying to become MLS for rental housing, we're missing it. And then missing it means we can't really study the need or how many units there are. And that just means for as much of a blind spot as we have about some things with housing, the rental market, the non low income rental market is something we just don't have a lot of great data on.
Good point.
Excellent.
And for the utilities, I mean, I always tell people, hey, go on the budget plan is always great because at least it allows for predictability in your monthly utilities. But we're assuming these are all based on recall and survey responses. So there may be some seasonality effects, especially in climates such as the Southwest.
Yeah. Exactly. And so perhaps, we're of the opinion that the safest approach with the data to provide policymakers in the audience with useful statistics is, providing results that vary assumptions on monthly utilities from $0 to $3, $4. I mean, we could, if you want, we could make the results up to $500 a month in utility, just so that we can have the results there, so that when those utility assumptions do kick in, the results are perhaps somewhat valid in those timeframes.
Excellent. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up at that point right now. We have 3 minutes to the top of the hour, and I want to be very mindful of everybody's time. This has been super informative. We really appreciate all of the rich data information that you have provided to us today. What I will do, it definitely is after this, Shawn and Nick, I will send you a remainder of the questions that came in. If you could possibly respond to those questions tomorrow as we send out the recording and the slides from this presentation, we'll also address those questions so that this way we'll make sure that we're touching base with everyone that was in attendance. Again, I would like to say thank you to everyone that tuned in today. Looking forward to seeing everyone tomorrow during our call with Lynn Judici, next week with myself, and then next month, as Amanda alluded to, we have Nevada Clean Energy Fund that will be hosting our Lunch and Learn. So with that being said, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everyone.